There are men who hold things together with their bare hands for so long that they forget what it feels like to let someone else carry any of the weight. And when a woman who knows how to handle fragile things finally reaches for what they've been protecting, they don't know whether to be grateful or terrified. Usually, they're both. I didn't open my shop in Wicker Park because I had no other options. I want to be clear about that. I opened Hadley's because I was the only person I trusted to do the work right. And the work: vintage garment restoration, structural repair, the kind of alterations that most tailors wave off because they can't see the original intention under all the damage, was mine in a way that a paycheck from someone else's shop never could be. I had worked in 3 places before I hung my own sign. I left 2 of them because the owners thought fixing their mistakes was part of my job description without being part of my pay grade. I left the 3rd because I watched a man take my technique for repairing box pleat linings, teach it to his other employees, and then describe it to a client as something he had developed personally while I stood 4 feet away with a seam ripper in my hand. After that, I saved for 14 months. I found a narrow storefront on a quiet block between a fabric supplier named Opal and a wine bar that didn't open until 5. I put my name on the door in plain black letters. No flourish, no tagline. I arranged the window with 3 pieces I'd restored myself: a 1940s beaded evening jacket, a Korean War-era dress uniform, with every button reattached, a Victorian morning coat rebuilt at both shoulders. People who understood what they were looking at stopped and stared. People who didn't understand walked by twice, something pulling them back without knowing what. That was exactly the idea. By the time I had run Hadley's for a year and a half, I had a waiting list, a reputation for refusing work I thought was beyond saving, rather than lying to a client about the outcome, and a firm policy about respecting my process, my table, my timeline, my way. If you rushed me, you paid a delay fee that actually existed in my service agreement, and not just in my head. If you told me what a piece meant to you before I asked, I would listen. If you assumed because you were paying more, you got more of me. You learned fast that I charged, what I charged regardless of who you were, because the fabric didn't know your net worth and neither did my needle. I liked that kind of clarity. It sat cleanly in the chest. The afternoon it started was the kind of late October day that Chicago uses to remind you it can make the sky any color it wants. Gray-blue and blustery, leaves cutting low across the sidewalk, cold enough to mean something but not cold enough for a serious coat. I was in the back working on a 1960s shift dress, and listening to the street sounds the way I always did. Not really listening, just holding them in the background like white noise, when the quality of those sounds changed. I set the dress down. In Wicker Park on a Wednesday afternoon, the noise is a specific thing. Foot traffic, someone's coffee order, delivery bikes on the one-way. What it is not is the sound of multiple expensive engines pulling to a coordinated stop half a block down. I stood in my doorway and counted 3 black SUVs, the kind that didn't belong to anyone who parked normally. Men in dark clothing got out first, 2 from the lead vehicle, 1 from the rear. They positioned themselves without appearing to, which told me they'd done it so many times that the choreography had become instinct. Opal had come out of her shop to look too. She made a small sound beside me that meant she was interested and nervous in equal measure. A man from the rear SUV was carrying a garment bag, not carefully. He had it slung over one shoulder with the kind of casual indifference that made my eye twitch, because I could see through the thin nylon, even from 30 feet, that whatever was inside it was structured, aged, and being compressed in a way that was going to leave permanent damage to the shoulder seam. I walked toward them before I'd made a conscious decision to do it. The nearest bodyguard stepped into my path, big, deliberate. "Ma'am, I need you to step back." "That bag," I said, looking past him at the man holding it. "He needs to carry it vertically, not diagonal. He's collapsing the inner support structure." The bodyguard looked at me, like I'd said something in the wrong language. "Whatever's inside is old," I said. "Old things don't flex the way new things do. The way he's got it draped is going to split whatever's been repaired along the stress lines." "Ma'am, I'm a conservator. I can read the silhouette through the bag. It's a structured jacket with heavy interfacing, and the way he's carrying it is putting full compression on the left shoulder. If it's already been weakened, that's going to crack the interlining before he gets another block. The rear door of the center SUV opened. I hadn't expected that. I had expected to be told to step back again, possibly less politely. What I hadn't expected was a man who stepped out and carried himself the way the air around him did, quietly and with full authority over whatever space it occupied. He was tall, dark coat, no tie, jaw set like he'd decided once a long time ago to stop making his face do anything it didn't need to. He looked at me the way someone looks at a thing that has appeared in the wrong place and hasn't been categorized yet. "What is it?" he said. "Her," the bodyguard said. The inflection meant problem. "I'm talking to her." His voice didn't need volume. It was already in the room before it arrived. "Whoever's carrying your garment bag," I said, "is going to damage what's inside it. He needs to hold the hanger hook upright and let the garment hang, not drape the bag over his shoulder like a gym bag." Something moved through his face. Not softness. Something more like a door being touched that hadn't been opened in a long time. He looked at the man with the bag and said one word. The man adjusted immediately. Then he looked back at me. "You know what's in there?" "No, but I know what the shape says. Whatever it is, it's been damaged before. Somebody tried to fix it without knowing how. The shoulder I can see through the bag is sitting higher on the left than the right. That's either a bad repair or the original distortion from stress." He was quiet for long enough that I became aware of how many eyes were on me from how many different directions. "You're a tailor," he said. "Conservator, vintage garments, military pieces, heirloom work." I held out my hand. "Rue Hadley, my shop's right there." He didn't take my hand. He looked at it, then at me, with eyes that were very dark and very awake in a face that seemed tired of everything else. "How bad is it?" he asked. I'd need to see it properly to say. But if it's what I think it is from the silhouette, it's manageable. For now. It won't stay that way if it keeps getting stored wrong. He looked at the bag again. A tightening moved through his posture. Slight, almost nothing. The kind you only caught if you'd spent years reading what bodies did when a subject arrived that they didn't want to be confronted with. Then he turned and walked back to the SUV. Opal told me who he was. An hour later, in my doorway, her reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, and her voice pitched low the way she pitched it when she thought information was dangerous. Ashton Vale. Vale Defense and Security Group. Private federal contracts, 3 buildings in the loop, a board that apparently fought constantly, and the kind of name that appeared in news stories with phrases like "decline to comment" and sources close to the company. I stood at my work table with a measuring tape in my hand and told myself the whole thing was over. A man like that had no reason to come back to a 400-square-foot shop on a side street. I slept badly anyway. Cal Sutter came at 9 the next morning, before my door sign flipped to open. He knocked anyway. Older than I expected. Silver at his temples, unhurried manner, the kind of face that put people at ease until you noticed the eyes and understood that the ease was a tool, not a feeling. He introduced himself, said he worked for Ashton Vale, and told me Ashton wanted to know if I could assess the jacket. Not commit to anything yet, just look. Tell them what was actually wrong with it. I asked why they hadn't gone to a professional conservator before now. He paused, then said that Ashton hadn't been able to let anyone touch it. That stopped me. "How long?" I asked. 3 years, he said. 3 years was too long for something to sit unaddressed without a reason that mattered. "Whose jacket is it?" Cal looked at the table, then told me. His brother, Caleb. Younger by 6 years, a Marine, killed 3 years ago when a mission went wrong in a way it shouldn't have been able to go wrong, unless someone had made it possible on purpose. The jacket had been handed to Ashton at the funeral in the condition it came back in, torn at the sleeve, 2 buttons missing. A scorch mark along the left hem from something nobody had fully explained. 4 different people had told Ashton to have it cleaned and stored. He'd carried it with him instead. I sat with that for a moment. Then I laid out my conditions, my space, my timeline, nobody touching the work surface without my permission. My assessment would be honest even when honest meant hard news. If I took the job, I wouldn't be hurried by anything except the jacket's actual needs. Cal listened without interrupting, said he'd expected something like that. He said Ashton would bring the jacket himself that evening. He arrived after I'd closed. I left the door unlocked. He came in alone. Cal waited outside, which told me more than any explanation could have. He set the bag on my table and stepped back, arms crossed, watching me the way someone watches a thing they've decided to allow, but haven't yet decided to trust. I unzipped the bag and lifted the jacket out carefully. Marine dress uniform, late Cold War era, dress blue A configuration. It was in worse shape than I'd been able to see through the bag. The sleeve was torn at the underarm seam, a stressed tear, not a clean cut, and someone's attempted repair was amateur work, wrong thread weight, wrong stitch pattern, already pulling away at the edges. The scorch on the hem had been spot-treated with something too harsh, that had lifted the dye around it in a pale halo. 2 buttons were gone. The remaining ones had been stressed loose by improper storage. But it wasn't beyond saving. I knew that within a minute. I told him so. He said nothing. Whoever tried to fix the sleeve didn't know what they were doing, I said. Wrong thread, wrong stitch. It's actually pulled the surrounding fabric out of alignment and made the original damage structurally worse. I'd have to remove the whole repair before I can address the actual tear. How long? 3 to 4 weeks, if there are no surprises under the repair. I looked up at him. There usually are. Something about that landed on him in a way I hadn't intended. He looked at the jacket, not at me, and I had the clear sense that he hadn't been in the same room with someone handling it like this, carefully, analytically, without looking away from the damage, in a very long time. Does it bother you? He asked. Working with things that are this far gone? I thought about it honestly before I answered. No. What bothers me is when people write something off before they've actually looked at what's still there. He was quiet for a moment, then, Ashton, you can call me Ashton. He came back 4 more times while I worked, never by appointment, always after 7, always alone, always the same, leaning against the far side of my work table rather than sitting, watching my hands the way a person watches something they want to understand but don't know how to ask about. We talked in pieces. He asked how I'd learned to do this. I told him about the 3 shops I'd left and exactly why. He asked which part of the work I liked most. I told him it was the moment you realized a thing you thought was gone was still there underneath everything that had happened to it, that the structure was intact even when the surface wasn't. He didn't say anything to that, but I caught the way his throat moved. One night I came back for my bag after locking up and found him standing at the work table, his hand against the sleeve where my stabilizing repair had just been finished. He wasn't holding it, just touching it, the way you touch a place you've been hurt, testing whether the hurt is still there in the same form. He didn't hear me come in. When I said his name quietly, he pulled his hand back. The look on his face in that moment was not the face of a man who feared anything the world could throw at him, except this one specific thing. Whatever this was. The thing he kept returning to in the dark when nobody was supposed to be watching. Tell me where you are right now, I said. What? When you get that look, tell me where you actually are. He was quiet long enough that I thought he wasn't going to answer. Then, a parking lot in Virginia, outside a chapel, someone's handing me a bag and I can't feel my own hands. I picked up the sleeve from the table and held it out to him. This is what came back, I said. I know, and I'm going to fix it, but right now you're in this room, not there. He took the sleeve from my hand, held it differently than he had a moment before, like the weight of it had changed. He handed it back, said very quietly, "Thank you, Rue." It was the smallest sentence in the world. It found something in me I hadn't known was listening for it. The threat arrived on a Thursday. I was walking to pick up a wool order from Opal's supplier 3 blocks over when a car pulled up slowly beside me, the kind of slow that was entirely deliberate. The window came down. A man inside smiled with his whole face except his eyes, which were doing something else entirely. He said his name was Greer. Said he'd heard I'd been spending time at the Vale building. Said his associates had some concerns and wanted a brief conversation. I said I was busy. He said it wouldn't take long. I said no. He said something pleasant about how Ashton Vale had a way of drawing people into situations that became complicated through no fault of their own, and that I seemed too smart for that. I walked faster. A door opened behind me. Not his car. Cal stepped out of a doorway. I hadn't clocked and told the man in the car that I wasn't going anywhere with them. The car waited one beat, then pulled away. Cal walked me back. He sat across from me at my work table and told me without softening it that Devlin Greer had been Vale Group's CFO until 8 months ago, removed after an internal audit found discrepancies that were still being investigated. That Greer had enough connections to keep causing damage from the outside. That there were people inside the investigation who believed he was tied to the intelligence failure that had killed Caleb. Not charged yet, but the kind of believed that came from evidence still being assembled. I sat with all of that. Then I said, he's not just going after the company. Cal looked at me. Every move has been aimed at the things that started mattering to Ashton again, I said. The board votes, his public exposure, and now me and through me, the jacket. I looked at the work laid out on my table. Greer doesn't want leverage. He wants Ashton unmade. He wants the grief reopened before anything has time to close. Cal was quiet for a moment, then yes. So the restaurant's next, I said, meaning the jacket, meaning the thing that had become proof that something could be repaired. I told Cal not to say anything to Ashton yet. He started to object. I said, wait. That night, I moved the jacket. I finished my current stage of work, wrapped it in the right archival tissue, transferred it to the climate-controlled storage unit I kept for high-value pieces 3 blocks away. I locked up my shop with the empty dress form, standing in the light, and went home. They came 2 nights later. 4 minutes in, nothing taken, no trace left except what the security cameras caught. I watched the footage on my phone and felt nothing I hadn't already prepared to feel. I called Cal. Ashton arrived at the shop before I got there. He was on the sidewalk in a dark coat when I came around the corner, and the look on his face when he saw me, before he rearranged it, was the most unguarded thing I'd ever seen from him. He moved toward me and stopped himself. It's not here, I said. I moved it 2 nights ago. He closed his eyes, just for a second. When he opened them, you moved it. I moved it. He looked through the glass at the empty interior. How did you know? Same way I know when a fabric is about to give, I said. You feel the tension building in the wrong places. Greer wasn't going for your contracts anymore. He was going for your brother. Something went cold and absolute in Ashton's face. Greer himself appeared 40 minutes later. He'd come to see the aftermath, which told me everything about how confident he'd been. He stood on the sidewalk with 2 men and a practiced expression of concern that didn't reach anything that mattered on his face. He said it was a shame about the break-in. Said he hoped nothing irreplaceable had been taken. Ashton turned toward him so slowly, the air around it changed temperature. Nothing was taken, he said. The practiced concern on Greer's face did something complicated then, trying to find a new shape and not quite managing it. Ashton stepped forward. Cal put one hand on his arm, not to stop him, just to mark the moment. A reminder about the cameras on 3 of the 4 corners, about the 8 months of work that was nearly finished, about what a confrontation here would cost. I stepped in front of Ashton. Not between them. Just close enough that his focus had to come through me first. Not here, I said, not like this. He looked down at me. The cold was still there, but underneath it something shifted. Something that recognized this voice the way a person recognizes a room they've already learned the dimensions of. He looked back at Greer. Quietly, he said, "The audit closes in 10 days. Don't be here when it does." Greer left. 3 weeks later, the jacket was finished. I pressed it with the correct interfacing and the right temperature. I had found period-correct replacement buttons through a military research specialist in Indianapolis. Right color, right shank height, right weight, indistinguishable from the originals. The sleeve seam was strong again, done correctly this time, nearly invisible to anyone who didn't know where to look. The scorch mark on the hem had been treated, until the dye came back as close as fabric allows, which is close enough to matter. I laid it on my clean table under the good light and looked at it for a while by myself before I called him. He came within the hour. He stood in the doorway and looked at it the way someone looks at something they'd told themselves they were no longer allowed to hope for. He crossed to the table slowly. He put his hand flat against the shoulder, the rebuilt shoulder, and held it there without speaking. "It's the same jacket," I said. "Everything that happened to it is still in there. I didn't erase it. I just made sure it holds." He was quiet for a long time. Then he picked it up carefully, both hands the way it deserved, and held it against his chest, not wearing it, just holding it, the way a person does when they've spent years telling themselves they don't need to. When he set it down, his face was different, not emptied, more like a room where a window had finally been opened. He said, "I don't know how to say what that is." "You don't have to," I said. He came around the table, stopped close enough that I could feel the warmth of him in the cool shop air. He looked at me the way he'd looked at things all along, completely, without apology, like he had already decided they were worth the full weight of his attention. "Rue," he said. Not Miss Hadley, the way he'd called me the first week. My name, the way very few people said it, like it was already a place they knew how to be. I told myself I kept coming back because of the jacket. "I know," I said. "Was I wrong?" I kissed him, because he had asked instead of assumed, and because some men, when they finally put down what they've been carrying, turn out to have the most careful hands in the world. He kissed back slowly, with the same attention he gave to everything that mattered to him. When we broke apart, his forehead came to rest against mine, and we breathed the same quiet air for a moment. "Sparrow," he said very softly. "That's not my name." "No," he said, "but it fits." I didn't argue. I think I already knew, by the time he said it, that it had been true for a while. People tell the story the way people always tell stories about men like Ashton Vale. They flatten it into something easier to carry. The powerful man and the seamstress. The woman who fixed him with her hands. That's not what happened. What happened is simpler and harder and truer than that. I saw something being damaged by the way it was being held, and I said so. He came back because something in him recognized that I wasn't afraid of what I'd found. What came after was built slowly, one honest conversation at a time, in a shop where the light was always right, and nothing was worth doing unless it was done correctly. Devlin Greer was charged 11 months later. The audit found what it was always going to find, what he'd done to the people around Caleb's mission, pieced together carefully over 2 years by people who knew where the threads led, followed. Ashton wore the jacket for the first time, on a cold April morning. He stood in my shop with it on over a plain white shirt, and he looked like a man who had decided that carrying the past didn't have to mean being buried by it. It could mean wearing it properly, choosing what it said about you, instead of letting it be the thing that defined you without your permission. I straightened the collar once, because it was crooked. He let me. That was the whole story, maybe. The man who held everything together with his bare hands, alone for years, finally letting one person reach for it. He didn't forget. He didn't pretend it was nothing, and he didn't let go of either of us.